I'm Görgess and you're listening to the SÓLET KLUB, a JCC Budapest Bálintház podcast. We are built on the principle of diversity, the belief that different identities and traditions enrich one another. JCC Budapest is an open, inclusive community where these voices find a home. If you value this mission, please consider supporting us. Giving is kosher. Today, we are sharing a special episode recorded live at the Minorities for Minorities conference at the Central European University, right after the historic general elections in Hungary.
You are forever experiencing a bit of a mismatch between who you are and what society is built for.
You are being told that you are a sick person and you need treatment. Suddenly you start to feel sick yourself.
Is by pointing out that the sickness is in society, not in the person.
But with the time I learned that being a victim is not a shameful thing, and it's shameful to those who turn people into a victim.
Imagine the act of sitting on a bus or choosing not to sit, anticipating that no one will sit next to you. Picture a job interview, wondering, is it my experience that matters, or was the decision made right in the moment when I walked in? You walk down the street, hyper-aware, not because of a single event, but because conflict is always a possibility. This is minority stress, the invisible tax on your mental energy paid every day just for being who you are. Joining us is Dr. Ilan H. Meyer from UCLA's Williams Institute. He's the architect of the minority stress theory, a foundational framework explaining how social stigma and prejudice impact the health of LGBTQ plus communities. His research remains a critical bridge between public health and civil rights policy. What exactly do we mean by minority stress? And what is the first thing that drew you to this field?
Well, what exactly we mean, I think we can talk a lot about the more details, but basically what it means is that if you're in a group that stigmatized, if your group experiences prejudice, stereotypes, you are forever experiencing a bit of a mismatch between who you are and what society is built for, who it is built for. And it's very much like you described in this introduction. It can be very subtle, like you described going to a job interview and you're not sure if the people that you're meeting are homophobic or racist or anti-Semitic or whatever. And you have to keep in your mind this vigilance. Vigilance is like waiting to see how to react more so than any other person who doesn't experience prejudice or stigma. It could be a lot more extreme, like being attacked with violence. So in all of these situations, there is, as I said, a mismatch between who you are and how society is welcoming or not welcoming you.
We are going to deep dive into that.
Yeah.
But joining us is Christoph Steiner, a writer, journalist, and plant-based activist. Since moving on from his career in television, Christoph has authored several best-selling books on veganism and social advocacy. He is known for his work in LGBTQ plus rights and for connecting the cultures of Hungary, Israel, and Greece. When you hear minority stress, Christoph, does it connect to any of your own experiences?
On so many levels, really. And I think this is something that we don't recognize, really. We don't recognize what's wrong with us, essentially. And my example when I was reading up about everything that you published was that basically when society thinks that you are sick and you are being told that you are a sick person and you need treatment, suddenly you start to feel sick yourself. And I remember once I was a part of a TV show when, so maybe they have it all over the world when they prank celebrities. And I was going to the doctor for an injection, and they told me right after the injection that there was something wrong with the injection and that it was the wrong one, and I physically started to shake. It was a prank, it was supposed to be a joke, but of course I had a physical reaction to that. So if I'm being told that I don't belong, that I'm not normal, that I should be treated, the natural instinct of any human being would be, even when you're very secure of yourself, to start to question, so how can I be better? And you start to develop physical symptoms. And yeah, I have personal experience regarding this here in Hungary. I was very young when I came out, in my early 20s, and it was not very common here in Hungary. So seeing how people were throwing beer bottles at me on the street, and how people were thinking that anything that I say can't be taken seriously just because I established that I'm a member of this community, definitely had a strong effect on me, and it probably contributed to the reason why I essentially left the country in 2009. But I never left the country in my heart, and that's why I'm back here, and that's why I find this discussion so important. So thank you so much for having me.
I think if I can say one thing, the origin of minority stress was to some extent addressing what Christoph was just saying, which is homosexuality was always seen as a disease. Mm-hmm. And what minority stress in general, what it does, and that's why it's connected to policy and civil rights, as you said, is by pointing out that the sickness is in society, not in the person. And it's trying to really shift the blame, so to speak. Instead of blaming gay people for being sick, instead of blaming transgender people for being sick, saying, no, the problem is society that creates this stress that we were talking about that makes people sick.
In any way, minority stress differs from biological stress, or is it a biological answer?
It is a biological stress. So minority stress is an extension of the stress literature. Mm-hmm. The stress literature started off around after World War II. So we think that stress is such a common term. It's really relatively recent in terms of the history of understanding health. And after World War II, especially because soldiers were coming home with PTSD or things like that, people just started to think about the impact of the environment, of being in, especially in a very extremely stressful environment of war, and how that affects their health. And again, that's where we begin to say, it's not the soldiers who are sick, it's the experience that they had, and now the treatment is to try to address the stress that they experience. Minority stress is exactly the same, it's just extending it to the area of prejudice and stigma, to thinking about social causes. But the effects can be very much biological and psychological, and of course, biology and psychology are very much connected.
There are stresses or stressful situations when we react immediately with the stress answer to a certain situation. Mm-hmm. Am I right if I say that minority stress stays with you for much longer than you expect? It's not just an answer to an immediate situation.
Well, it's actually both. So minority stress is a whole range of stressors that we can describe and we can talk about. So those include both the kind of internalization of social attitudes, which we refer to as internalized homophobia or internalized transphobia. It can include very, we like to call them minor hassles in the stress literature. In the minority stress literature, you can talk about microaggressions. So there's a more minor in the sense that they don't cause huge changes in the life, like being thrown bottles, which could be more than minor, but maybe being called names. Those are what we call everyday discrimination or minor events. And then there's large or major events, which is the kind of hallmark of stress research, starting with war and ending with being a victim of violence, rape, job loss. Those are called major events. So all of this, and there's a whole range of them, have different types of responses. The thing that I think is unique about minority stress is that as long as the conditions, meaning homophobia, transphobia in society, stay, it is a chronic situation, because even if you're not experiencing any stress right this minute when I'm sitting here, the conditions around me didn't change yet, right? And so in that sense, it's a chronic stress.
Christoph, was there a time when you didn't even realize that you carried this burden, this stress with you?
Of course. There was also a time when I denied it to myself, within myself, because I felt that if I admit it, then I'm going to give in and I'm going to become a victim of society, which I never wanted to victimize myself. I always felt like that makes me feel more vulnerable and maybe weak. But with the time I learned that being a victim is not a shameful thing, and it's shameful to those who turn people into a victim. So I really dislike this narrative when people say, oh, you're victimizing yourself, oh, this community, this society, this nation always have to play the victim card. It's not that anybody is choosing to be a victim. People make other people turn into victims. So it took me a long time to embrace this vulnerability and turn the weakness into a level of strength. And when I moved in 2010 to Israel, and in the beginning I had a very, very positive, very uplifting experience. I felt like finally I am fully accepted as an LGBTQ person, living in Tel Aviv, obviously, because it is a little bit of a bubble. But then being Jewish from my dad's side, I started to experience being a different kind of minority, and then the stress started to affect me from that matter. So, you know, all my friends whose dads were Jewish, they were going through the conversion because they really wanted to fit in. And I didn't even really go after my family tree. I was like, you know, it's good enough that I know that, good enough, horrible enough, but should be enough that my grandmother was taken from her village in Poland. But that wasn't enough, and that is a very painful experience. So in my own ways, I also started to sort of research, but obviously not in an academic level like you did. I wanted to research all of these things from the human experience point of view. And I also started to cross to Palestinian territories. I started to have conversation with Palestinian people. And then I truly understood that what I need to stand up for and against really is the discrimination itself. And I'm not just an LGBTQ activist, or I'm not just speaking up for Jewish people or against antisemitism. I have to speak up against the phenomenon of anybody trying to make themselves superior over another person or other communities.
Do you still catch yourself monitoring what you say or what you do in connection with minority stress?
I think we all do to some level, also because we are living in a thankfully very politically correct world, but we are only adjusting to it in a way. And every time when we speak about things like this, we need to make sure that we are using the right kind of language. And I think this is a very, very good direction, but also puts a very big responsibility on us. And I think essentially it is a good responsibility. And I also feel that when I experience this kind of stress, I always have to remember that I'm one of the very lucky ones. Essentially, I'm a privileged person. I have a place to sleep at, I have food to eat, I can practice my spiritual practices, I can be with my husband, and if I feel this stress, so how can those people feel who don't have all of those privileges that I have?
Ilan, when the prejudice becomes the inner voice of the individual, can you unlearn it individually, or is it the task of the society?
Well, it's a little bit of both, but I was thinking, you know, one of the interesting experiences that I have when I talk about it, especially when it's not an academic only audience, but even then, and I've talked in different countries, you know, in China, in Chile, in, of course, the US, in Europe, and there's going to be somebody who comes to me at the end and tells me that they're gay, even if they're not really out yet, and tells me that my lecture, which is academic, helped them understand about themselves and help them realize that they're not sick, which is what Christoph was talking about before. So there's a learning that happens when you begin to understand prejudice and stigma. And that, in a way, has been the hallmark of feminist psychotherapy, which was always to, in a sense, it's an educational process where you begin to explain and understand that social forces work on you in a way that is leading to ill health, right? And so that's something that you can learn by yourself. It's most often something that you need to get connected with, something that you need to be affirmed from outside. You know, I sometimes talk about in the US, we used to have this slogan, "Black is beautiful," in the 70s, where the black community was telling, especially black girls, I don't know, I'm sure black boys needed to hear it too, you know, black is beautiful, because society was telling them the opposite. And I always give this example of course, any one black girl could stand in front of the mirror and tell herself black is beautiful. But it is very different when you hear it from society, at least from your society, if not from the entire society. And I think that's what affiliation with groups, such as JCC, I assume, does, is connects you with certain resources, with a point of view, with a value system that is sometimes different than what you might hear if you weren't affiliated. And certainly with LGBT communities, LGBT media, nowadays, I guess, influencers, you know, you get some perspectives and some modeling that helps you to begin to unlearn the negative stigma.
So we are just past a historic election, and the previous, hopefully the previous system, was designed and built, and the cornerstones were stigma, prejudice, hate speech. How does it affect the human body, and how does it affect the majority? Because we talked about the minority, but how does it affect the majority to live in a system like that for almost 2 decades?
Well, sadly, as you know, it wasn't invented 2 decades ago in Hungary.
Yes.
It's something that exists all over the world and has existed through many decades, if not centuries. So there's obviously the effect on the person who is stigmatized. There's also the purpose behind the scapegoating. And the purpose is sometimes something that is very effective. It makes people who are in the majority feel better about themselves, I guess. it also provides an outlet for who is to be blamed. You know, Hitler was very skilled at blaming the Jews every time there was a problem. And I've just am reading a biography of that period when Hitler was coming to power. And it is scary how reminiscent it is of some current politicians who bring up minorities to attack them as a way to incite the public, as a way to even numb the public to other problems. So clearly in the United States we have really mean attacks on transgender people.
Yeah.
Absolutely, not only, of course, immigrants, refugees, all that, but in terms of the attacks on transgender people, I think as of today, I will talk about it later, there are like 760 legislative proposals in the United States, legislative bodies across all the states, 760 in the past 3 months of this year against transgender people, trying to attack different things, sports, bathrooms, driver's license, whatever. And that is a tiny minority of people, right? So you have to ask, why is this become such a big deal? Why is it such a big issue? But it's always the minority that is to be blamed for. You know, I can go to examples all over the world, but I think in Hungary, I was here a couple of years ago and I didn't realize that the ban on gay parade was actually a much bigger ban on all kinds of demonstrations. Yeah. And that is a classic way of inserting anti-liberal ideologies and policies by attacking one group and through that influencing entire society. Now so in some ways it works for some politicians. And in that sense, the people who are not in the minority don't feel any harm themselves. Of course, that is not the whole story, because we know from studies across the world, from different nations, that societies and nations that have more liberal attitudes towards LGBT people actually fare better. They do better economically. They do better in terms of how people feel, not just LGBT people. They do better in terms of how people progress economically in that society. So it is not necessarily a direct relationship, but there is some impact for society as a whole from these more oppressive and repressive policies that actually dampen the growth of society and the arts and for journalism and literature. Everything is affected when you begin to attack any group.
Christoph, when you moved from Hungary to abroad, did it give you like changing the physical space around you, did it give you physical relief as well? And after the elections, for the first time coming back to Hungary, do you feel relief?
Yes and yes. I think that when we are, even if it's not 100% real from practical, factual level, when we tell ourselves that now we placed ourselves to a free space, it has a very strong effect on us. And for me, moving away from the place where I had so much trauma and where I was feeling attacked so often, I felt that, yes, now finally I can truly be myself. But I do have to admit that on some level, this is almost like a placebo. Like I really like to emphasize all the time that of course we have a very, very strong responsibility on improving society, but it's always starting within ourselves, and we are the ones who are liberating ourselves. So I've been to several countries, I travel a lot, and I've been to many countries where being gay isn't legal or even maybe dangerous. But because I didn't have all those personal traumas that I had here in Hungary, somehow I still felt more free than here in this frame that I knew so well. So this is something that I think we always have to encounter, that the personal liberation definitely starts within, and then we start to affect the society and the world with conversations, with interactions. And coming back here to Hungary is also a little bit similar, because yes, I was overjoyed, I was ecstatic, I was like swimming in an ocean of euphoria, but with my rational mind, I also know that it's not that we were given the magic key that will solve everything. We have a prime minister who is a conservative prime minister, and I never in a million years thought that as a liberal person I would vote for someone like that. But of course, this was our way out. And of course, I also have to tell myself that if I'm giving into the worries, if I'm plotting worst case scenarios regarding what may happen with Péter Magyar being our new leader, then I'm once again going to pull myself back into the stress, which again will make me feel ill. And I think it's really important to distinguish between fear and worries, and on the other hand, just paying a close attention on what's going on. So many people ask me, are you not worried? How is he going to relate towards LGBTQ people, for example? Will he do things for even more things for Roma people, which he does already by now? There will be 4 Roma people in the parliament, which we never had in the past. But all of these things, will antisemitism be addressed better, and all of those things? The situation of refugees, will it going to be dramatically improved, which is very necessary? We can't have answers to all of these things, but right now what we can do is to trust that because us as society, and society is built of all of these individuals, we had the power to make this change, so we can still have this long-term effect while he's sitting on the throne. He's not somebody who is telling us how to be. We are not serving him, he is serving us. And the fact that he got this position is thanks to us. So we can just remember that all of his future decisions, I strongly believe that the reason why he is a bit vague about LGBTQ people, for example, he just says this one sentence that he is building a country where people can love who they want, as long as they don't harm others, which is a good start, I like it. But he doesn't say anything more. We need to talk about it. We need to talk about transgender people's rights, which was dramatically taken away from them by the previous government. Obviously, we need to talk about lots of things. So I think he is doing that because right as we speak, they are in discussion within the new government. So what is going to be our policy? Because the reason that we got to the power is thanks to these people. We have to show some level of sympathy towards them.
Exactly. In some ways, we need to relearn talking to each other, and we need to relearn democracy as itself. Ilan, when you have multiple minority identities and you have multiple stigmas that are overlapping, does this adds up or multiplies?
Well, that's a good research question. It doesn't really have an easy answer, actually. There are many forces that work, but let me first explain how intersectionality, how we think of it, especially within that context. So within the LGBT community, of course, we have many different other identities that people come with and different backgrounds. So Christoph mentioned, I'm privileged. I think he meant within an LGBT context, he said he feels privileged. And that is definitely an advantage that some people have within the LGBT community. So the intersectionality idea points to the fact that you can't use one model or one approach to understand every aspect of the community. So, for example, if you are a black lesbian, your experience of minorities will be different than that of a white gay man, than that of a transgender Hispanic woman, etc. And each of them has many different pressures or stressors that are attached to that. Then that's one layer, which is ethnicity. And then you add socioeconomic status. Of course, we know socioeconomic status, whether you're rich or poor, whether you have a high education or not, which are not always the same. That is a different layer on top of that. So if you're a black lesbian, you experience certain things, but you experience them different if you're very wealthy, if you're very poor, if you're educated but not educated, and so forth. So intersectionality just points to the idea that you need to analyze each group with a different set of facts around it. And this is important, especially because if you want to have an intervention, if you want to change things, you need to think about the interventions in an intersectional mode as well. The whole idea of intersectionality originally started actually in the area of law relating to criminal justice, and pointing out how black women were seen very differently in courts versus black men. And the idea was we need to think about interventions that we propose that maybe help black men but hurt black women. The same thing in the LGBT community. We need to think about how any intervention, any action we do could have different effects on different groups of people. One example is access. In the United States, we have a very effective intervention in the form of LGBT health clinics, but they're focused on primarily urban centers for obvious reasons. But if you live in rural America, in the South, you're not going to have access to that. So again, we need to think about, that doesn't mean that it's a bad intervention, it just means that it's not sufficient. And then, of course, with the internet, maybe we can offer internet services, etc. So you just expand your thinking beyond your first thought to try to look at the different effects that you can have on different subgroups.
Christoph, have you ever felt excluded from one of your minority groups, let's say, because you belong to another one as well?
Definitely, of course. It's kind of story of my life, really. Also because I'm one of those very few people who I like to talk and sit and get into very serious topics, just like we do now, and put on a jacket and a button shirt. But tomorrow, for example, I'm going to DJ at a party, and I'm going to dance, and I'm really going to channel a totally different personality in a way. And I think all of us have the right to do that, but society is not ready for that, and unfortunately even minorities are not ready for that. So for example, somebody who comes to me today and says, oh, I really love the conference, and sees me at Budapest Pride dancing as DJing, may say, now he's not representing gay people well enough, because now he's showing that stereotype how straight people sometimes generalize about gay people. But I am, in a way, a proud stereotype of a gay person. I'm not going to pretend. I'm not going to straighten up and act like a alpha male just because society expects that from me. So sometimes I get that sort of attack from even LGBTQ communities. And you know, I can put out a serious statement on Instagram and I get lots of new followers, and the next day I put out a post. After the election, I was jumping on the bed, half naked, and I was singing Ding Dong, the Witch is Dead from The Wizard of Oz. And then people were unfollowing me saying like, oh, now you're just like putting oil on the fire. So I refuse to fit myself into one box. And then again, I mentioned earlier about the Jewish experience. Especially nowadays, there is a very big division. You know, are we going to talk about Palestinian people? Are we going to talk about how they go through things that the Jewish society knows very well? And we can definitely become allies for each other if the conversation is in the right tone, if conferences like this, like the Minorities for Minorities conference happens, and we involve more and more minorities, we can learn to communicate much better than how social media, for example, makes us behave, which is sometimes a real nightmare. And then that's the same thing about all of those things, like, you know, even being a Hungarian, being a man, people expect you to behave, talk, dress in a certain way. And once you are getting off that trail, you are going to be judged by your own community as well.
Do different minority groups actually understand each other, or are we stuck in the competition of traumas? Let's say, like, different minority groups are stressing their own voice and sharing their own voices, but do they understand each other? Can they work together? What do you think?
I don't have great, you know, I try to talk about things that I study, which this is not something that I have studied, but I don't think there is great evidence that people sympathize with other groups. And I think there's an othering of other groups often. That, I mean, we had in the United States, even these last elections, there were so many Latino people voted for Trump.
Yeah.
And they seemed to be completely counter to the idea that they would sympathize with the idea of refugees because so many of them are Latino. So I don't know, I would like to hope that that could help. I definitely think that it should, because it does have a certain, you have a certain sympathy from understanding from your own experience. But there's also the problem that people and groups sometimes tend to be a bit egoistic in the sense they only see their perspective. And so I don't know, do you have any better sense of that?
I mean, definitely there is an improvement. I think we finally start to understand that we must learn from each other's experiences to do better. But Israel is a very sensitive example for this, how, because, you know, being Jewish, and I would say even being Israeli, in a way it's belonging to a minority, and being judged from so many places, sometimes rightfully, sometimes not rightfully, is already a big enough burden. And what's happening inside of Israel? They are fighting the different interpretations of how to be Israeli, how to be Jewish, is just creating a greater and greater and greater gap between the people. And this is not helping anyone. It makes individuals and communities lonelier and lonelier. And this is very, very sad to watch. So these kind of conversations that we are having now are very important, and my fear is always that people are anyway always listening to only to podcasts, and they read books that are anyway fitting to their own narrative. And I think this is why we have to somehow, some way, find the connection with people we think we don't have connections with. This is our only possibility to have conversations between minorities, especially if those minorities sometimes think about each other as enemies rather than being in a shared experience.
Is telling minorities or even helping minorities to be more resilient, is it a form of victim blaming? Or shouldn't we fix the system itself?
Yes, absolutely. This has been one of my complaints about the idea of resilience, but it doesn't mean that the answer is no, we shouldn't be resilient. What it is the question is, what is resilience? So in resilience, you can talk about the person as resilient and society or the community as resilient. And in the minority stress model, in fact, I do talk about resilient, which in stress literature was referred to as coping and social support, like how you cope and what kind of support you get. And if you think about those as social responsibilities to make available to people the ability to be resilient, is different than if you expect people to be resilient with whatever they already have. So to me, the idea that you provide, like I mentioned before, to community centers, through educational programs, through opening opportunities, through laws that protect against discrimination, those are all, in my mind, resilience effort. But if you expect a person who is growing up as a young kid in a church in some very religious community to, like we said before, stand in front of a mirror and say, no, being gay is good, that is very hard. Some people might be able to do it, but I don't expect that from anybody.
Christoph, what would you say to people who would say to a minority or to a member of a minority that life is hard, we need to grow a thicker skin, you need to learn to cope with that? What would you say to them?
So interesting that you're questioning, you're asking this question, because this is exactly what I wanted to say, that I had to grow a thicker skin. I had no other choice, really. And, you know, I'm even proud of it that I did, but I'm also ashamed for society because I wasn't supposed to. It's not something that people have to go through, having to level up their, I don't know, I could even call it like insensitivity. Sensitivity is a beautiful quality. We should all stick to it, and we should say, I'm not going to become a warrior, a fighter, just because I'm being attacked. But unfortunately, I felt like I had no other choice, and because of this, I can sometimes understand when people coming from minorities are becoming aggressive or violent. And I apologize for the example. In my understanding as a vegan person, animals do have the same quality as human beings. But when you go to a cat who was traumatized or a dog, that animal may bite you or scratch you. And this is what we do to each other as human beings. And this is very, very sad. So essentially, I think what's very important is, yes, we need to become strong, but we don't. We must not lose our sensitivity, and we have to keep on valuing sensitivity as a very, very positive attribution.
Especially in a very masculine society, right?
Yes, definitely. This is also a very, very big part of it, really.
Yeah. Closing question to both of you. What can we do this afternoon as an individual and as a society to do better?
Wow. Well, I think jumping off from what we were just talking about, I think your last election, is a demonstration of how when different groups join efforts for a purpose, they have a lot of power. And I know that you mentioned here the alternative was still a right-wing alternative, but I believe some of the left-wing groups decided to let it be for the better good. And I think that shows some kind of empathy and understanding of the importance of collaboration. And I think when we talk about minorities collaborating, it's hard because everybody has to give up something. So I think, and that might be true for people on the left as well as people on the right, that we need to find kind of what is the better goal, what can I be tolerant of in order for a better overall outcome, even if I have to give up some of what is important to me. So I feel that kind of approach may be helpful or hopeful for us, definitely in the United States. We have a lot of competition of approaches and how to deal with things, and in my mind, too little collaborations and cooperation. It's the same thing in Israel, as you mentioned. I think everybody's getting very extreme, and I think we need to find more how do we connect.
Christoph?
I definitely second that. I agree with Ilan. And of course, I could give a very, very long list of, we have to learn about the experiences of other people. We have to be able to vocalize our own experience in a way that other people can understand it better. We have to take good care of ourselves and of each other. We have to be able to talk better and in a more understandable way about mental health, for example. And in the same time, I can say to really close in a positive note that I think we are already doing it. So, we complain a lot about the state of the world. Of course, it is a mess in a way. But if we are looking back, there's never been such an open discussion about what we are all going through. And much as there is so much about social media which I dislike, and sometimes I wish it didn't exist, but in the same time it helped a lot for all of us to create a personal stage when we can share about what we understand from the world and how we think it could become better. And not all of those voices, of course, are communicating in a way that majority can connect to it, but somebody can connect to it. So I think us as humans, we are doing pretty good in making the world a better place. And now we just need to put the puzzle together. It's going to be a big job. It's a big puzzle of many, many pieces, but fingers crossed that we are on the right path.
Ilan, Christoph, thank you very much for being here
Thank
being with us.
Thanks
a lot for having us.
And thank you for joining us. If you value what we do at JCC Budapest and want to help us continue, please consider supporting us. You'll find the link in the description where you can set up a one-time or a recurring donation. And please don't forget to subscribe, and see you soon.